I'm Chris Williams in the Office of Assessment and Accountability, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the high school assessments. And with the high school assessments, we have several things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about for K-Prep, we're going to talk about the reading, mathematics, science, and on-demand. Then we will move into our end of course assessments, which for early graduates. And then we will go into the ACT for our college admissions. And then we will finalize our presentation today with a little bit about transition readiness. So let's begin. You'll notice that on the slide here is our testing plan for this year. Our focus for high school is with our grades 10 and 11 assessments. And so let's talk about those particular ones that you're going to see. You'll notice that we also have for grades 3 through 8, as well as the field test items and etc. But we're not going to be talking about 3 through 8 or the field test items, field test assessments at this time. Our focus is going to be on that grade 10 and 11. If you look at grade 10, you'll notice that we're going to be taking the reading and mathematics. For grade 11, your students in the spring are going to be taking the science and on-demand writing. Also, during the field test, there will be one piece of accountability that you will be testing. And a lot of you have already either started testing or have finished testing with the field test. And that is the School Climate and Safety Survey. That will be the one thing that will be during the field test that will be in accountability. We do want to let you know that this will be the last year that we would administer a piece of accountability in the field test. So what we're going to do is from now on, you will see this in the summative assessment. So the School Climate and Safety Survey will be part of our operational going forward in 2021. And that'll be within our summative window that we have at the end of the year. But this year we had to provide it within the field test because it was, like I said, it is online. And so we had to get our elementary and middle school students tested with that particular piece online, where when they get ready to do the operational part, that will be paper for them. So that's why we had to do that. Another thing is that I want you to notice on the screen is our KDE DAC information calendar. There is a link to it at the bottom of the screen, and if you click on it, if you're in your PowerPoint and you've got it live, and if going through and be able to click through, you'll be able to see and click on that link, and it will take you to all of our important dates for assessment, so that way you have it in one location and not have to go, well, now what DAC webcast was that, or what Monday DAC email were those important dates in. So that'll keep it in one location for you. Now, another thing I want to tell you about is the accountability. How is the accountability going to go in for this year for our high school assessments? You'll notice on the screen that it does go over all of our grade levels and assessments, but our focus this afternoon is just going to be on the 10th and 11th grade. So for 10th grade, we field tested last year the reading and mathematics. And when we field tested that becomes operational this spring. And so that's what we're going to be using for proficiency. And you'll notice that we do not have growth at the high school, so that's why there's a difference of color. You'll notice that proficiency for high school will be in green, where the others will be blue for proficiency and growth at the elementary and middle school. Because they do have growth, but not high school. Also for grade 11, you'll see that we do have Science and On Demand that will be part of our separate academic indicator. And then transition readiness. Our ACT will be used, our college admission exam, which is our ACT exam, that will be used for transition readiness this year. We gave you a heads up last year that, hey, look, that would be the last year we would be using ACT for proficiency because we field tested reading and mathematics. Now that it's going to be, those two subjects are going to be operational, we will be using that now for proficiency and just using the ACT now for transition. Social studies. People ask all the time, Chris, what about social studies? What are we going to be doing with social studies? Social studies will be field tested in the fall of this coming year, and then it will be operational in the spring of 2021. So just want to let you know that particular piece of it. And what are we going to be field testing on? What grade levels? 6, 9, and 12. But when we have it in operational in the spring, it will be at grades 5, 8, and 11. Now, let's just go over a little bit more about the School Climate and Safety Survey. Remember, you're supposed to administer it as part of the field test in every tested grade level prior to the one particular content that the student was assigned to in Pearson Access Next. Now, there are also two constructs for this, and they will each receive a separate score. So you'll have a score for quality and a score for safety. And then those will be combined into one to give you an overall score that will be part of accountability in Pearson Access Next coming in the fall. People say, well, Chris, what about rosters for the field test? There are no rosters for the field test. There will be rosters in the spring for the survey because it is part of accountability. So be looking for that school climate and safety, and you'll also see that presentation, see that particular roster will be presented in SDRR presentation that you can watch as well. But look for that survey to come available, that roster to become available in the spring once all of our other rosters come available, and that'll usually between mid to late April. And those rosters will stay open until the second week of June. So just want you to know that particular piece. So if you've got any like non-participations of why a student didn't take the survey, you'll be able to upload those into those spring rosters. And then also you'll also see the demographic information and be able to also, if you need to change any accountability for the students for the survey, you'll be able to do that. Otherwise, those accountability will be pre-populated for you when rosters open in the spring. And you'll see all the students in there as well. Now, let's go in and let's talk about some details about our K-Prep and what's going to happen in the spring for these assessments of reading, mathematics, science, and on demand. Now, for those, what you're going to do is we always will pre-populate those students into Pearson Access Next, which we call PAN, for you. And those dates are usually pre-populated in there according to which shipping option that you chose, whether it was option number 1, or option number 2 or number 3. And you can see on the screen all of the dates that we will be pre-populating Pearson Access Next with your particular students, so that way you can start. Once they get preloaded in there for you, then you can start creating those sessions in Pearson Access Next. Now, what happens if after you've already pulled those, and we've pulled that information from Infinite Campus and have sent that to Pearson to pre-populate Pearson Access Next? What's going to happen? Then you would have to manually add your students in there. and of course, they would go be assigned the content at that grade level that they're going to be testing. For grade 10, it would be reading and mathematics. For grade 11, it would be science and on-demand. Now, creating test sessions. Creating test sessions are a local decision that is up to you however you want to create those test sessions. So once those students are already pre-populated in there for you in Pearson Access Next, then you can start creating those test sessions. And how many ever test sessions or however you want to break it down is up to you. But as a DAC or a BAC, you all can decide on as many test sessions you want. Or you can put the students all into one test session and do that. But remember, if you put how many ever students you put into a test session, you always want to make sure that all the students have tested before you close that test session out. Now, you're going to create test sessions in Pearson Access Next, but then when you get ready to test students, where are you going to do that? You're going to test them on TestNav. That's the platform that Pearson has to be able to launch the assessment. And your technology people in your district should have already had, if you've already field tested, they'd already had that ready for you. And then in spring, you will see that TestNav app on your computers. The students would click on it, be able to have their ticket in front of them with their username and password, and log into TestNav to take whichever contents they are at the grade levels in grade 10 and 11 for high school. Always when you're in TestNav, you as the proctor, you want to always make sure that you are monitoring the students' progress in Pearson Access Next, but also actively monitoring students by walking around and monitoring them during the assessment to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be, that the students who, when you give out those test tickets, that they are assigned to the student that is sitting down in front of the computer to test. And if you're not testing in a computer lab, but testing in a regular classroom with Chromebooks, etc., that you do make sure that the student who is testing has their particular test ticket, because those are secure materials and you're supposed to keep those secure throughout the assessment. Also, when students are in TestNav, they'll also be able to go, once they have finished a particular content, they always want to make sure that when they're in part A, that they submit their answers to be able to move into part B of that particular content. And it always asks them, submit their final answers, and it will always ask them, are they sure they want to submit that? And once they submit those answers, that is it. They won't be able to go back to any part of that section that they just completed once they submit it. You will be able to start in Pearson Access Next starting April the 6th through early June to be able to create, start, and monitor your test sessions. And that's going to be an important piece. We do keep it open because we do still have through June, because we still have districts who will be testing at that time as well. Some of us get out early, some of us get out late. It depends on what you have as your school calendar and district calendar for your district. Now, do want to talk to you a little bit about more about the test sessions and what you're going to be doing for those, because what you're going to do is, like I said, you can create those however you want. Also, we do accommodate, because of technology needs, to be able for you to be flexible on your scheduling of students for the subjects. And like I said, we've already field tested reading and mathematics and science and on-demand. And so those we know are going to be operational times, and we know those times work for you. And so you want, when it comes to the operational testing, you have to adhere to the testing times that each content area is available. You can't give any extra time unless it's for students who have an IEP or 504 or a program services plan student who would need extended time. So like I said, we give you that flexibility to be able to get all your students tested. There's also lots of things that you can use, to test, whether you test in a lab, whether you test in a classroom with Chromebooks, etc. So just want you to know that there is a lot of technology that you can use to be able to test students on, lots of platforms to be able to test students with the TestNav that Pearson provides. And we do want to let you know that, how you set up your sessions. You can do it by periods, you can do it by classroom teachers, you can do it by content, however you want to do that. But remember that you must complete that test session per content within that session. You cannot stop in the middle of a session unless a student, gets sick or whatever. Or if there's a drill, because some people say, well, Chris, what do we do if we have a tornado drill or a fire drill during our online testing? What you want to do, if you have time, is for the students to end it, and then if it's just a drill, then the students, once that drill is over with, they can come back in, and then you can resume the test for them. You also want to make sure that you document how much time, if you already started the session, how much time is left, so you know how much time to give the students. And remember, when they end it, and then resume back, it will keep the amount of time that they did have as well. TestNav does record the amount of time it takes for each student to take the test. But you, as a proctor, want to make sure that you document that if you have any unexpected interruptions during testing. And also, you want to make sure, if that happens, that you also document on the seating charts, because you have those individual group seating charts that, just make a little note on there that, a drill happened today, whether it was a fire drill or a tornado drill. But if the actual thing actually happens, the first thing you want to do is get everybody to safety. Don't worry about the assessment. We'll help you figure that out. We want you to be safe during this time that testing's going on. Another thing is with testing, people say, well, Chris, if I have, one-to-one, with the technology, and I have a lot to be able to test my students one-to-one, and everybody has a device to be able to test one-to-one, then, you can test all of your 10th grade and 11th grade at the same time. But, that doesn't always happen. We don't always have where every student has a one-to-one device. So what can we do? Because we have 5 days to test, and then we have 4 days to make up right after our 5-day window. So what can we do if we don't have one-to-one computers for our students, or etc.? What can we do? Well, one option is that you could start out, and you could start with your 10th grade, and reading has to be administered before mathematics. And when you're looking at the reading in mathematics, reading has to go first, So you could start on Monday and test your reading student and get all of them tested in reading. Then you can move the next day and you could start with your grade 11 and start them out with science, because science is the first test that you do for grade 11, and then get them all finished with science. And then on Wednesday you could go in and then go back to grade 10, pick up your mathematics and finish out your grade 10 testing. And then on the fourth day, which could be Thursday if that's the way you're starting out, you could finish up your grade 11 with the on-demand. As long as you test in order by grade level and by content, you are going to be great, and you will not have an allegation. It's when you get them out of order or don't adhere to the time that can lead to allegations, and so we don't want you to have to do that. Also with makeups, like I said, once you've had that 5 days to test, you will have 4 days after that to make up. But a lot of people like to do their makeups, during their 5-day test window. That's fine. You can do that. That's up to you. Or you can wait until those 5 days are up and then do your makeups. It's up to you how you want to do that. Now, we do have a 5-day test policy. Now, this is also, I know it's kind of hard to see it on the screen, but you do have this in your resource for high school that was sent electronically to you when you received all of the PowerPoints and etc. for our trainings, if you attended one of our February DAC meetings. So let's talk about this 5-day test window, because we do want you to test you have 5 days to test all of your high school assessments. There's 4 of them. And but we do take in consideration, because of technology, maybe there's not a way for you to be able to get all of these students tested within those 5 days at the high school. So if that happens, we will allow an extension, but it needs to be used as a last resort. And it also has to be approved if you're going to be doing if you want an extension to your 5 days. Because like I said, we've already field tested this. With reading and mathematics, we know it's going to work. We've also did operational last year with science and on-demand. We know those 2 subjects worked last year, worked beautifully, and you were able to get those students tested within 5 days. But now adding the 2 in this year to make 4 subjects, if by chance you have got with your district technology person in your district, and you have exhausted every avenue of, you've used every laptop, you've either used every Chromebook, or you've used, every computer lab, and there's this year, before you do the extension, you can also borrow from your elementary and middle school if you need to. But we know that will be a problem next year, because then everybody's going online. So if even with you've exhausted everything for your technology, you've asked your district technology person, hey, is there any more devices that I can use to be able to get those kids tested in 5 days? If that person comes back and says, no, we've used everything that we possibly could, then you can apply for an extension. But things that we want you have to fill out is that there's a Google form that is attached to this that in our office that people have created for this. And it's wonderful Google form for you to fill out, and it'll ask lots of information from you. And you're probably saying, well, Chris, who can do this? The district assessment coordinator is the only person who can file for an extension. just like it's the same person, your DAC is the only one who can file for, can do the test windows in SDRR. So when you're going in and you're want an extension, you would click on this and it'll take you to a live link. This live link will take you to the Google form. It will allow you to go in and put, like I said, put lots of information, fill out it first. Then we also want you, excuse me, to we want your test schedule for your high school. We want to know all the personnel that you have that would be testing students at the high school. We also want to know how many, what type of computers, etc., that the numbers of those to be able to, you have to supply that information to us. And then the rationale of why you are needing that extension, even though we've already field tested and also used it operationally for half of it already. And then once you submitted that as a DAC, then our office will go in and approve that or deny it. And we will do that in a timely fashion. So people say, well, you didn't say our backs or anybody could fill that out. That is true. No building assessment coordinators or etc. If you're not the DAC, you are not the one to be filling it out. And if you try to fill it out and you're not the DAC, it will say, go see your DAC. So just keep that in mind when if that's the last resort and you can't get it, then you would want to fill out that paperwork and file for an extension. Otherwise, you'll be 5 days testing and get everything done. And we think most of you a lot of you should be able to do that during that window as well for your 14-day K-Prep window. And that's for yours, because we know every district their 14-day test window will be different depending on their last 14 days in their district for testing. Now, foreign exchange students. People say, well, Chris, foreign exchange students, do we test them? Yes. Foreign exchange students, you're going to be testing them on all of our state required assessments. With every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, that came in about 3 years ago. And so now they will not allow no non-participations for foreign exchange students, just for that particular reason. Now, if there's something medically or extraordinary circumstance goes on, then you can file for a non-participation. But for our foreign exchange students, they will also not only test with all of our assessments, but they'll also be part of our accountability, and whether it'll be your cohort 4-year or 5-year, depending on how long it took the student to complete their education. Because normally students can complete and graduate in 4 years, but sometimes students may take that extra year to be able to graduate. Now, for those, we want you to make sure that because cohort usually starts when they enter high school, and that's your cohort year starts your 9th grade year, or whenever, if you didn't start in 9th grade, but you started in another grade level in high school, it could go, 9th through 12th is where cohort will be in your high school. So with that, we want you to make sure that when you go in and look in SDRR and look at your cohort students, that you are look at your data in SDRR, that if any changes need to be made to cohort, that has to be done in Infinite Campus, because the rosters in the spring for that cohort section will be read only. And so you will have to go in, and you also want to make sure that you do pay close to those withdrawal codes for your students for cohort. Make sure you've got the right withdrawal codes to those. And people say, well, Chris, where can I find those? Those are underneath that I need help in SDRR. That will be able to show you all those withdrawal codes. You don't want a CO1 to be in there for cohort. You want a particular withdrawal code, whether it be a W, whatever, whether the student is, moved out of state or country, that withdrawal code, whether the student had went to Job Corps, or, sometimes our students, becomes deceased during the window. Make sure that you've put that particular withdrawal code in Infinite Campus so that way it pulls over in SDRR for your cohort correctly. And there will be lots of opportunities to be able to look at your cohort data besides the spring. It'll open up again in the summer, and then you'll also see it again during data review with our other rosters that you will see during data review in the fall. So and also there is a cohort tool. So if you need some, if you're having trouble with cohort, there is a cohort accountability tool underneath the I Need Help to also help you with this data as well. Now let's talk about our English learners. English learners for our operational assessment, if I'm a first year EL, I'm going to take mathematics for participation if I'm in grade 10. And then in grade 11, I would take the science, because for first year participation, it is either in mathematics or in science. And people ask me, Chris, well, what constitutes a first year EL? Well, it's 12 months or 240 days. And then that is 200, and those are, you would just count up, if a student is, has interrupted schooling, they come back to your district or leave your district, and then they return again. They may have gone back to their home country or gone to another state or whatever, and then come back to you. You would count the days that they've been with you throughout, and you just keep track of those. And if that student is less than 240 days as the first day of your 14-day test window, then they would still be first year EL. But we do have an exception, because sometimes students have already came in, they came in last year during the K-Prep window, and if they've already had a one-time exemption on the K-Prep already, then those 240 days, go out. So it's either the one-time exemption on K-Prep or the 240 days, less than 240 days, whichever comes first for your ELs. Now, what are they going to have to do in that mathematics and science for first year participation? They have to at least do 4 multiple choice or 1 extended response or short answer in the mathematics, and they also have to do the same for science as well at those particular grade levels in high school. Also, what you're going to have to do on rosters for our first year EL students is to go in, because even though they're taking it and it'll count against your participation rate, we want those students excluded from your accountability. So you would go in to the rosters in the spring for the K-Prep rosters and mark those students as first year EL non-participation. So that way they will not be part of your accountability, even though they are taking it for participation. Now that I'm no longer a first year EL, but I'm a second year beyond, I will take every assessment at that particular grade level. So if I'm at grade 10, I would take the reading and mathematics. If I'm enrolled in Infinite Campus at the time of testing, in grade 11, I would take the science and OnDemand. And of course, you always have to make sure that they do have a current program services plan, that they've been receiving those accommodations throughout, and not just at the time of testing. Now, let's go into our reading assessment, and we're going to talk about, just briefly, about the reading, and then we'll go into the mathematics, and then science, and then on demand. And then that will finish up our K-Prep section, and then we'll move into EOCs. So for reading, for our students, it's going to take you, there is a times chart that will be part of the DAC back manual, but also the times for each of the content areas will also be in every one of the test administration manuals at the high school level. With what times how long it's going to take the assessments, how many parts there are going to be, what is going to be assessed at that, whether it's going to be for reading, it'll be multiple choice, short answer, and extended response. And you'll have 75 minutes to take part A and then 100 minutes to take part B. There is one form of the test. Now, let's move into mathematics. Mathematics at grade 10 as well. It's going to have multiple choice and an extended response. It'll have one form of the test, and then you're also going to have a part A, which is the no calculator part, and then you're also going to have a part B, which is the calculator part. So for our regular students who are taking part A, they will not have available a four function or a scientific or the graphing calculators, because remember, you have three options for high school as a calculator, and so that won't be available to our students on part A. And then from part B, depending on which calculator they would need for that particular item, then it will pop up for that student to click on to be able to use. And for part A, it's going to take you about 15 minutes to do that. Part B, 110 minutes. Now, people say, well, Chris, what about our IEP or our 504 students? Can they, our IEP students, can they have, can they get a calculator on that, no calculator part? Well, of course, because if they have it marked in their IEP that student can have that particular accommodation for a calculator or 504, then they can do that. And so what you want to do is that for that section, they would need a handheld calculator to be able to use that, and it has to be a handheld calculator that's on the approved list, because there's not a way in Pearson this year to just open that up, that non-calculator part for the part A, just for our IEP and 504 students. So hopefully in the future that will be an option, but for this year they would need a handheld calculator for that approved list, from that approved list. And remember, if it is not on that approved list, that you have to go through our office to be able to get approval to be able to use something that's not on the approved calculator list for our students who have an IEP or 504. Now, reference sheets. People say, well, Chris, are we going to have paper copies of those reference sheets? We are not. Those reference sheets, that have the formulas or the conversions, etc., those will be embedded within the test item. So if a student needs a formula for that particular question, it will be right there in that, embedded within that particular question for that student. If they don't need a formula or whatever to answer the question, then it will not be available within that embedded item. And students will be able to get those online with that when they log into the mathematics and are taking that, and if it requires a formula, then it will be available online. Here are the 4 functions. I've already went over these with you but this just shows you what they actually look like. We are still using the Desmos online calculators for our students when they're testing with Pearson Access Next, because we still have Pearson as our vendor, and so we will still continue to use the Desmos calculator. Now, this will be what what every student will be using. They won't be using their own calculators, you know, for this particular for the mathematics part for grade 10. Unless they have an IEP or 504 and need a handheld calculator. Now, let's talk about science. Science is going to be just like last year's, but if you're new and you weren't here to administer the science, that is at grade 11. The standards that will be addressed will be grade 8 through high school, with engineering technology as well. There will be multiple choice, multiple select, and extended response. There's 4 clusters per form on 4 forms of this particular test for science. So science is the only one in high school, content-wise, that will have 4 forms. All the rest of them, reading, math, and on-demand, only have 1 form of the test. It will also have the graphing calculator tool available to them, the Desmos. It will be online if the student needs it. That is just optional, but it will be available during the science operational. It will take you 60 minutes to do part A and 60 minutes to do part B of the science. And then let's talk about our last our last content, which is our on-demand writing. Now, with our on-demand writing, we have several options for you for some of those online tools that you're going to see. For grade 11, you're going to see online available is the Dictionary or Thesaurus. And then that will be electronically as a tool up at the top to be able for the student, if they need that particular thing for the on-demand writing. Another thing for the on-demand writing is they'll have another tool, which is their notepad. Notepad allows you to be able to go in just like what we used to have for the printed versions of our assessments, was the pre-write section. But now we'll have a notepad to be able to type in your information into the online tool for that notepad. Another thing is that that feature also allows you to cut and paste information into that notepad, and that is very nice if students are trying to get their thoughts and things down for that. Now, what else can a student have for the on-demand writing if they're taking it online? Well, for high school, you can also use scratch paper, and the student can either have a blank piece of scratch paper. They can either have it colored, however they want, but remember it has to be blank and content free. Another thing is that when you print out the test tickets for the student, and if you print those, by page and print those out for each student, then individually, it will allow you to have at the top of the test ticket, their username and password to log into the system, but then also be able to have at the rest of the page to be able to use the scratch paper, and also on the back. Now remember, that is different than when you're taking the paper pencil version of on-demand, because you cannot have any scratch paper for that. So for our high school, with testing online, there are some flexibilities to be able to use different tools and to use scratch paper as well for our online assessments. But remember, that scratch paper is also secure materials and has to be destroyed securely, just like our test tickets do. Now, let's talk about how long is it going to take me to take the on-demand writing. Well, for part A, which is the standalone prompt, it gives you a choice to be able to, to pick an option. The student would not do both options. There are going to be two options, and the student chooses one of those options to do that based off. They'll have two different prompts to be able to do that. Now, that will take you about 40 minutes to do, and then you'll have part B, which will be your passage-based prompt, and that takes a little bit longer. That's 90 minutes. Now, how many seal codes you're going to need for when you're testing our students online in reading, mathematics, science, and on-demand? You're going to have 2 seal codes for each content area. And so, where are you going to get those seal codes? Those seal codes, when you go to print out the test tickets, you'll print out a separate sheet for the seal codes for each of these contents, so that way the student, you would write that once you've printed out the seal codes for those, and they're not on the test tickets that the student would receive. It's on a separate sheet that the proctor would need to be able to have. And so when you do the seal codes, you'll write those up on the board. If you've got a whiteboard or a chalkboard, you'll put that on there so the student knows for each of the content what the seal codes are that they're going to be testing for that particular session and that particular day. Seating charts. Seating charts are required. You always have to have seating charts for all of our state required assessments. Whether it be individual or, if you're doing accommodations, or if you're doing group administration, in the computer labs, etc. You always have to have seating charts, and those are important to be able to know who was the personnel in there testing the students, the proctors. Also, if you had assistants, help monitoring. If you've got people who are going to help you with monitoring in the rooms as well, in the testing rooms, you want to make sure those names are documented, as well as where the students took the test, because that comes an important piece when you get to allegations, because sometimes we know things happen, and if you by chance get an allegation because something was not administered correctly for some reason, then you have to make sure those seating charts are, because that'll be one of the pieces that Patsy will want to see. Patsy Kenner, who is our allegations coordinator, she'll want to know and be able to see those seating charts and where those students were located in that room, and then also the room number that the students took the test in. And then also, those seating charts are important not only, for the allegation part of it, but also to know, helps with makeups, because, if a student is absent, you can mark that on the seating chart and know that you've got to do a makeup for that student. So that's just an extra little assistance for you. Now, back to why should we keep those seating charts for up to a year? Because of an allegation, Patsy has a lot to go through, a lot of paperwork to go through, plus she also has to go out to the schools in your district and go over these allegations as well. So it does take time when she has to do those. And so we do want you to keep those up to a year on file if you've got an allegation. And a lot of people like to keep those electronically, even though you can go to our KDE website and print those off as paper versions. It's up to you how you want to keep them. Whether you want to keep the paper versions that you have downloaded off of our, printed off of our KDE website underneath our KPrep page. If you go to assessment support, and you can go to either forms or go to the KPrep page, and both of those, it'll take you to those particular forms that you'll need for the seating charts. Accommodations. Let's talk about accommodations for our online testing, because all of these accommodations can be given to a student if it is marked in their IEP 504 program services plan, and if they've been using those accommodations instructionally throughout the year. Then for our IEP students or EL students, for that first one on paraphrasing or simplified language, that is for directions only. You do not simplify or paraphrase any part of the content. It's only for directions only. Then you can also have bilingual or English dictionaries for our EL students. And those can either be paper copies or electronic. If you use an electronic dictionary, bilingual dictionary for our EL students, you have to have a separate source for that student to be able to access that, because when they're in TestNav, they cannot, and of course, if you use the electronic versions of the bilingual dictionaries, that they have to be a word-to-word translation, and it cannot go to internet. So therefore, it can't be used in the same thing where you're using TestNav, because if you do, TestNav shuts down everything besides their particular platform once you get logged into to that for Pearson. So you'll have to have a separate thing to be able for the student to be able to get access to those bilingual dictionaries as an EL. Readers, if a student has a human reader, that can be, they can read to the student right off the screen. If they also for students, so if they don't have a human reader, they can take the accommodated form and get a text reader for students who have an IEP 504 program services plan. Now, and remember, if you do a text reader, what text reader does, it allows the students to have a headset on. It allows the student to also be able to visually see, they'll have a link to be, it's not an online assessment, so it'll be a separate link that will have with a separate username and password for students who are going to get that accommodated material. And remember, that's paper. So what the student will see, they'll look at the screen, and in that particular browser, be able to see the test items, but then they would have to respond in a test booklet if they're using text reader. If they're doing it online, of course, the human reader would just read the items right off of the screen for the student. Now, oral native language support. The student can be provided oral native language support for both online and also for the accommodated version if they have it in their plans. Also, they get extended time, whether it's time and a half or double time. Remember to make sure that that is also specifically in their plans, which one they get, so the proctor knows how much to give that particular student if they're testing online. Also, there's Scribe. If how we used to have for the accommodated materials, those are all paper. And so if the student is testing online, they can have the proctor to type in their responses, and they have to do it exactly of what the student says. Also, being able to, the student is the one who is the owner of that particular piece, of this testing. And so for scribing, they have to tell you where to go in and put in those capitalization and punctuations, etc., when they're testing online, and where our paragraphs go, and etc. Also, calculators can, we've already gone over the calculator part. Manipulatives, you would have those available for that student to be able to use. And remember, those have to be content free. Can't have it be free of writing to be able to use the manipulatives for our online assessment, to have those right there available to that student, because they can't get up and walk around and get that stuff. They need to have it accessible to them to be able to choose which ones they would need if they needed it for the assessment. Also, assistive technology they can use. They can also have reinforcement behavior strategies, that they use, throughout. But remember, when it comes to the behavior, if they use any type of like behavior chart or whatever, that can be used to go, from testing room with them, from the classroom to their testing room. But remember, you cannot provide any feedback until after testing is done for those students who get those behavior strategies. Also, like reinforcement, you also for behavior, you always, have the student to tell them to stay on task, do their best, and go for it. That, that's part of that reinforcement strategy. Also, students who are deaf and hard of hearing also can have interpreters for our online assessments. And then if you want to know specifics of these, and that we do have a online toolkit that is available to you on the KPrep page of our KD website. When you go to assessment support and go to KPrep, you'll be able to find that online toolkit toolbox, and that'll help you also with providing accommodations. Also, there's a separate training besides the high school that will be done on accommodations that you can also look at and get more information, and also screenshots about the accommodations. And then don't forget, we always have the inclusions of special population. We have the PowerPoint and the training that goes through these accommodations, and then also our administration code. You have to have all of that before you even start the assessments. Now, I talked to you that our accommodating materials are paper pencil. The students will have Form 1 of this. If they need Braille, large print, text reader, audio CD, or flash drive, because we do know that with our audio CDs, that even though we do have the CDs, a lot of our technology has now gone away from the CD players, and we have the USB ports to be able to use our the thumb drives to be able to put that in to your devices. But we do know some people still have CDs, CD players. So if you do have a CD player, you can use that. If you do not have a CD player, then you can use the flash drive. You can order that in Pearson Access Next. You always want to order those accommodated materials during your window, and then once you get your materials, and if you're short on those, you can always put in an additional order in Pearson Access Next for those. And now I explained about text reader, because text reader, you can get in and you can visually see. It'll also highlight as it's reading to the student, and also they have headphones on to be able to hear it and see it visually. But for audio, the students don't visually see anything. They just have the test booklet in front of them and have a headset on, hearing someone read that information to them. So that's the difference between audio and text reader. Now, here is where you're going to be able to ship your materials back, what you're going to be shipping back to Pearson, and what you need to be keeping for those accommodated kits. And remember, that's the only piece of paper materials that you have to keep up with to ship back to Pearson, is with those accommodated kits. And like I said, you with the scratch paper and with the test tickets, you will securely destroy those according to your policy that you have in your district. Now, tips for online testing. You always want to make sure that you have enough staff to be able to actively monitor students, be able to walk up and down, the aisles or rows that you have in your testing rooms. You also don't want to be doing anything else but actively monitoring. People think, well, Chris, if I'm just looking at Pearson Access Next and monitoring our students, is that all I should be doing? No. That just kind of helps you know where the students are in the test session, but what else you need to be doing is walking around, because it's very important, like I said, is to actively monitoring. Also maintaining test security. That means those test tickets have to be secure, that scratch paper has to be secure during and after testing is over with, and you have to collect those two pieces of information. And when you're sitting down and providing that, that test ticket, make sure it is the correct student, because some of them may have the first name and last name the same, but there may be a middle initial, or it could be the same name but be spelled differently. So you want to make sure that that student who's taking that test, it has their own test ticket. Another thing is that you also want to make sure that you maintain test security during the assessment by not allowing students to go to internet or etc. During the testing, because if you're in TestNav, it shuts down everything else that the student could be able to go out to. Another thing is that also to maintain test security is you always have to have a cell phone policy. You want to make sure that you do have a policy in your district how you're going to do that. Some districts don't even allow it to come to the testing room. And then other districts allow it to come to the testing room, but they collect it. And we do know that we do have students who for medical reasons, may need their cell phone, in front of them for those cases. And if that happens, if you need it for a medical reason, that student should be testing in a separate location and not with everyone else, because they may have to use what we call stop the clock. And that's where you would go in and pause the session to let the student for medical reasons take care of what they need. Sometimes they may have to monitor their glucose, etc. to while they're in the test sessions. And some of those are sometimes either a pump that is attached to the student that electronically goes into the cell phone, or that the student has to manually enter that particular number, so that way their parents know how they're doing throughout the day with that, with their insulin and etc. And then sometimes, students also, if it's too low or whatever, they may have to get it, an injection. So, that is a possibility during testing, that we do allow that for online with that stop the clock. Another thing is that, not only, for those, but then we have students who don't want to give you up their cell phone. They're like, I'm not doing it. I'm not giving that up. And you know who those students are. If they don't want to give up their cell phone, you have to have in place a baggie for them to be able to slide that phone in. And remember, it should be off when they slide it in. And that you seal that up and tape it to their desk. And then you have to, have more people in there if you've got kids who are going to keep their cell phones on them, close to them. Now, we do have some kids who like to be sneaky. And even though you have, Ask them if they have a cell phone. Watch kids when they come into the test rooms, because they could have it in their hoodies, in their pockets, they could have it in their jean pockets. They also have in their jean pockets, they can also have holes in their pockets that they can easily slide a phone in, etc. Another thing is with technology, besides just the cell phones, you also want to make sure you take up the smartwatches, because that also goes out to internet and they could browse, etc. Another thing is that goes out to internet are those Fitbits. So just keep those in mind, because we always want to make sure you've collected all that information, so that way it doesn't give a student a chance to be able to go out to anywhere besides being in that particular TestNav platform to test. And people say, Chris, what about the test tickets? How far in advance can we print those out? Well, we recommend to do it the day before, but some people say, well, Chris, can I print it out, even before the day before? If you do, just remember that's more time that you have to keep those test tickets secure, because until testing day. Technology, we went over a lot with technology, but I do want to tell you on this particular one that one thing with technology that is that Windows 7. So if you're working on another Windows besides, because Windows 10, it'll work on Windows 7, Windows 10, but a lot of people some people have upgraded already to Windows 10. If they have, great. If they haven't, you'll still be able to use Windows 7, etc. This will be the last year to be able to use that. And if you've upgraded to Windows 10, it can also lead to some other issues when it comes to testing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Always want to have your technology people available in your schools and your district to be able to troubleshoot anything that happens during testing. Also, if they have any questions about the devices or what they need to be doing to get ready for testing for operational, your district technology people can reach out to Paul Shoemaker at the Kentucky Department of Education. He works with them on a daily basis. Your district technology people, and then also your district technology people, when they receive information or updates from KDE, they also will share that with their school level people who are going to be doing that in the schools to help you on a more regular basis. And also there will be updates coming often to you about the technology and getting your devices ready for testing on the TestNav platform. So make sure that your district technology person is aware of everything that's going on. And if they have questions, they can always call us at KDE, and we'll be able to work with them. Like I said, Paul Shoemaker is wonderful to work with for the technology issues. And any other issues, you can call our office, and we'll be more than glad to work with you. Now, if you have upgraded to Windows 10, here is a special feature that they have done. If you've got kids who are participating in esports, there is a thing that comes with when you upgrade to Windows 10 is a thing called Game Bar. It allows the student to be able to take screenshots and record broadcast video games during their sessions when they're working with the esports. And remember, esports is usually with this Game Bar, they're supposed to be using that particular thing after school. But Microsoft when you update to Windows 10, it automatically puts that Game Bar on. And so you have to disable that Game Bar feature on all of your computers if you've already upgraded to Windows 10. If you have not upgraded to Windows 10, you don't have to worry about this. But for the ones who do, you're probably saying, well, Chris, are there instructions of how to do this? Yes. there is a resource that we sent you with the February DAC materials. Underneath the high school is this game bar instructions to disable it. And another thing you also want to make sure that your technology person knows about that. I'm sure they probably already do, but if they don't, make sure you just share that with your technology people in your district. They need to know that your district technology people, that if you've already disabled it, and if you get any updates during the test window, it will enable that again with that update. So then you'd have to disable it again. So check with your district technology people and make sure you know when the schedule is to do these upgrades, or when you get, if it happens during the test window. Now, monitoring. Now, I've told you how to monitor, during testing as a proctor. Now, we in our Office of Assessment Accountability, we come out and do some monitoring visits. Those are randomly selected. Computer randomly selects those, and then we get those, and then we will come out from our office in teams to come out and just visit your school. Now, we're not there to look for things that you're doing wrong or whatever else. We like to come out and see how testing's going on with you in your district. So we will notify our districts when we're coming out, usually around the morning before we get there, and let them know that, hey, look, we're coming to your district and we're going to do a monitoring visit, a site visit. And what we do is we like to look at where you're testing, the rooms you're testing in, whether it be for regular students or for accommodated students. We also like to look at all the other extra rooms you use for testing. We also like to come out and go through a little interview process with you, just to kind of go over what you did before testing, what you're doing, during testing, and how and after testing, and just any questions that you have for us. You're more than feel free to ask us at that particular point when we come out, because we'll be more than glad to go over any questions that you have while we're there as well. Resources, you'll see those on the screen. Also, there's a link at the bottom of the screen that'll take you to Pearson Access Next for Kentucky. Our Kentucky page has all these resources for you to be able to, and they're in the bottom right hand corner to be able to click on those online user guides, etc., to be able, if you're still having some issues of how to set up, if you weren't able to be there and you weren't, participating in the field test, then this is your first time doing this, you also want to go through those tutorials, because Pearson has a lot of resources to help you when you're setting your students up and getting them registered, because you always have to register. Even though your students are in Pearson Access Next, you have to go in and put those students into a test session and move them over, and then register those students, and then start the test session. So there's several steps that you have to make sure that you're ready for. And this will help you with that. Now, that concludes our first part with K-Prep. Now we're going to move into our end of course with our EOC exams for our early graduates. Let's talk about this. With our early graduates, you always want to make sure that they are flagged as an early graduate in Infinite Campus, that you have that intent form signed in your district if you've got any students who are going to be graduating in 3 years or less, because that's what an early graduate is. They have to be in that early graduate pathway. Also, when they're in that early graduate pathway, they have to pass, and they have to meet the benchmarks on every one of the EOC exams to also be graduating. And they also have, those 4 subjects are Algebra 2, Biology, English 2, and also our U.S. History. And if they've met the benchmarks on those, they've met their, graduation requirements, and then also that they have taken the ACT at least once and met the benchmarks on that, then they are ready to move on and transition from high school into our either into college, etc., where they're wanting to go next. And when those students are in this early graduate program, they have to score at least proficient or in or distinguished, but the minimum they have to do is the proficient on all 4 EOCs. If they do distinguished, great. But we should not be having students, because remember, you have a window that you had to do that, to order those. Those were back in the fall that you had to do that. You had to order all of your assessments depending on which window you're going to do. And then once you ordered those, then we printed those and from our office and have sent those out to your district. And we've already finished window 1 for early graduates and have got those scores up on the KDE Secure site under our secure web applications, to be able to download those and get those scores for your early graduates. But then testing window 2 has already started for our early graduates, so you should have already received your materials, have started testing those, because that'll go to, that started February 24th through March 6th. And then you have the last window, and it's very important that when you do that last window, that you get those that you get those scores back. And the way to get those scores back quickly is if you get those students tested early, because we do know kids are going to be graduating in that last window, and so we want to make sure that we do meet that requirement for you to get those scores to you. Now, students who also are an early graduate, here are all the things that I just talked about, and just wanted to kind of give you a heads up. These are the things that makes a student an early graduate. And also, like I said, not only do they have to take the 4 EOCs and take the ACT at least once, but they also have to participate in all of our field tests and our operational assessments in those particular grade levels that they're assigned in. Here are the windows that I was talking to you about. You'll receive the scores for window number 2 around mid to late April. And then the last window, like I said, the quicker you get those students tested, get those shipped back to us. And remember, you're responsible for shipping those back to us. And you always want to make sure that you are sending those back to where, because they're secure materials, and there has to be a way to track it. So whatever you use in your district to ship, make sure it has tracking information so that way you can have that information. Now, that takes care of our EOCs. Now we're going to move into the ACT, which is our college admissions. Remember what I said, this is the ACT is going to be used for transition readiness this year. It won't be used for proficiency like it had been in the past. The administration times for the initial date is March the 10th. Your makeup date for your initial will be the 24th. You'll see that you have the accommodations test windows. We do give a little, ACT does give a little bit longer window for accommodations to allow those approved ACT accommodations, or the EL supports gives you a longer window to get those students tested. Also, if you're testing online, you have a little bit more flexibility with testing your students. And when you're testing online, you also have the flexibility to go back and forth if you've got your computer set up and everything on time with ACT, to be flexibility to be able to go back and use paper if you need to, or just test all your kids online. However you want, it's up to you. But if you are strictly paper, you have to stick with paper. You don't get the option of doing paper and online. Here are the makeup test dates, and then also the makeup date for the standard time, and then also for the online testing window. You want to make sure that you do adhere to these testing dates and these makeup test dates, because you don't want your scores to be invalidated. And remember, that's another thing with doing using ACT accommodations. Make sure you've got approved by ACT on all the accommodations that you're going to be used. Because if they're approved by ACT, for ACT approved or the EL supports, then you'll get a college reportable score. Otherwise, you would not. We do at the state pay for one administration of the ACT for every student, and that's at grade 11. If you are a grade 11 student at the time of testing in Infinite Campus, then that's what you will be taking the ACT. Students who are retained in grade 11 will, if they're repeating the 11th grade again, they will take the ACT again. Also, our foreign exchange students will take if they are in grade 11, and also our early graduates will have an opportunity to be able to take the ACT. And it may be before their 11th grade, because they may be graduating as a 10th grader, etc. So that's just for our early graduates. So they would be put on to, they would be added to the rosters and then be tested. Our foreign exchange students also, like I said, they'll be taking the ACT. The ones who, and our English learners, second year English learners will take the ACT and will be accountable. But the ones who will not take the ACT as an 11th grade will be our first year EL students. They would not even take the assessment. You don't assign them a test booklet. You would just go into you would just file a non-participation during the ACT rosters, which will be opening March the 11th. And because it's always the next day after the test has already started is when rosters open for ACT. So on that March 11th, you would go in for first year EL and mark them. You would add the student to the roster and mark them as first year EL, so that way they're exempt from your accountability. Alternate K-Prep students do not participate in the ACT. They participate in the transition attainment record during their window for alternate K-Prep. And then also for our English learners, remember I told you they would not take it, first year EL do not take it at all, not even for participation, because you don't want a partial booklet going back to ACT, otherwise it'll be scored. Formats, here are the formats for ACT online and paper. Like I said, if you're testing online with ACT, you have the flexibility of doing some online paper combinations. Here are some examples. This is not all the examples that you can have, but it is part of them. It is several examples. And remember, as with ACT, it always has to be the first activity of the day. Accommodations. I went over accommodations with you. That window has passed to be able to get the accommodations for to get approved by ACT, because those had to be approved already before now, before you start testing. And so your accommodations coordinator in your district would have already done that and submitted that information. Remember, if you have students who do not get the ACT authorized accommodation or the English supports, if they are using other accommodations, you have to go through, like for the K-Prep, they have to go through and be approved by ACT if they're going to use those. But remember, if they use any K-Prep accommodations, they do not get a college reportable score. And you always want to make sure that all accommodations in any of these three categories here, that those are approved by ACT and they already know what's going to be given to the student. Seating charts. I've gone through seating charts before in the K-Prep section, but you also have seating charts for ACT. Another thing with ACT is people go, well, Chris, since we have to do one for ACT, do we have to do one for KDE? Yes, but what you can do is you can copy the one that you're sending back to ACT, the seating chart, and that will be sufficient for ours. So you don't have to go and print off the ones off our website. You can use the one for ACT during the ACT one will also suffice for the KDE one as well. Also with ACT, always want to make sure you adhere to their calculator policy because they have a separate policy, calculator policy, and remember your calculators have to be approved to be able to do that, and you have to make sure that when the students are coming in and if they use their own calculators or the ones that you're providing for them, that those are on that approved list and they don't have anything they're not supposed to have on those calculators. And of course, they cannot share those calculators during the assessment. Now with reporting, always want to make sure that when you wait till that 8 weeks have elapsed before contacting ACT about your reports. Also, we'll have for your answer documents for all of those that you've submitted. Make sure not to submit any blank answer documents or those will be scored. Also with the district and school profile, those reports will be in Pearson Access Next no later than July of 2020. And those usually stay open until the fall. Usually around October is when they'll close again in Pearson Access Next for your ACT district and school profile reports, because ACT no longer provides those on a CD or printed copies of those particular profile reports for you. Here are the DAC responsibilities, and you can see you've got limited things that you're supposed to do, but just making sure that you're ordering materials if you need to for students who may have missed the initial test date. And then also making sure that everyone has an account in Pearson Access Next, and then viewing your shipping option, shipping information and being able to ship those back on time, because that's very important for ACT. You don't want to be late for shipping back your ACT materials. Another thing is the DAC, you also have to do the rosters. Now let's talk about those rosters. Okay, if you had any English learners and you were testing those back in January, February, you also know how to do the rosters. You're going to know how to do the rosters for ACT. Also, if you had any students who did the case screen back in the fall, back in the summer, you also know how to do the rosters as well. Your rosters will be blank for ACT when you get those. And don't freak out. Don't say, Chris, oh my gosh, why are my rosters blank? Because they're going to be blank. We're not going to pre-populate those. We only need to know if a student did not get tested for ACT. And if a student didn't get tested, there needs to be a valid non-participation reason why that the student didn't get tested, whether it's medical, extraordinary, etc. Make sure that during this March 11th through April the 3rd, during that window that you have filed those, you have added the students and filed those non-participations. That's the only thing you're going to do is to add a student to the roster for ACT roster is if you need to file a non-participation. If the student doesn't need a non-participation, then you're not going to file it. Also, what you're going to have to do is people go, well, will we see these rosters again? No, you won't see the ACT rosters again. That'll be something new that you haven't, because remember, ACT is being used for just transition. And so you'll see transition rosters and be able to go in and mark your your students who are accountable and do non-participations for that and etc. But when it comes to ACT, where you'll see those, where you'll see ACT again will be underneath those transition scores in the fall when we get ready for data review. Now, here are some important resources, and if you click on this link on ACT Academy website, that is hyperlinked and it'll take you to all of these free resources. Make sure that your students are aware of these and take, if they want to use these, that is, make sure they're aware of it. Here's ACT's contact information. If you have any questions about ACT, always call ACT. If you have any questions about accountability, you can call our office, or about rosters, you can call our office and we'll be more than glad to work with you on those particular topics. Now, our last thing for our high school is transition readiness. Now, people have questions about transition readiness. Now, we talked about ACT, how it's going to be part of transition readiness this year, that is no longer going to be part of proficiency. Last year was the last year to do that. Now, let's go into this particular chart, because in this chart you want to make sure that you do have, the students are going to meet the graduation requirements and get a diploma, but they also, in this transition readiness, they have to at least meet one of the requirements, either academic or career. And if I'm an English learner, I have to meet the English language readiness by using Access and scoring a overall composite of a 4.5 on that particular assessment to get the English language readiness in the high school, whether anytime during their high school career that they met, they were in the EL program and also met this criteria. We will pull that information and show that when they're grade 12 and for the transition readiness piece. Also, for the our ELs, they also have to not only do the English language readiness, but they also have to meet the academic or career readiness. Now, let's focus right now on the academic readiness. Okay, so one way I can do it is either meeting the benchmarks on ACT in mathematics, or and also I have to meet it either the ACT in English or reading, not both, for those last two, for reading or English. You have to do the first component because of mathematics, because it's the quantitative or natural science, and then the second part I have to be oral or written communication, etc., and that meets it either in reading or English, not both. Then, or if I didn't meet it on ACT, then I have to meet it on the Coyote benchmarks. Or I can also meet it by doing, 6 hours of KDE approved dual credit and receiving a C in each of those courses. Or I can do it in 2 advanced placement courses and doing a 3+, or scoring a 5+ on 2 exams for international baccalaureate. Or I can do it on Cambridge, like I said, at Cambridge Advanced International Exam and meeting benchmarks on 2. Or completing a combination of these, and I'll show you some of these combinations when we get to the last slide here, because I'm going to go through some of those scenarios with you. And you see that bulleted, I know it's kind of hard to see it on the screen, but we do have these resources for you. This chart is on when you go to the KDE website and go to accountability, you'll be able to see the transition page. It is full of information for you. It has a PowerPoint that we've done. I've worked with the Office of Career Tech and Student Transition on this as well for the career part of it, career readiness. We did a video and a PowerPoint for you. Also, there's a page too that has lots of resources for both of these, academic or career readiness. Has hyperlinks to all the KDE websites where you can find this useful information to help you know more about transition readiness. But that bullet is very important, because when you get into this, you have to demonstrate one quantitative reasoning or natural science, and then one oral, written, or communication, etc. So you have to meet both buckets. And also, when you go into career readiness, it goes into, you either have to have industry cert that's approved by the Kentucky Workforce Innovative Board, or you have to meet the benchmarks on the career end of course assessments. Also, on the or meeting the benchmark on the career and technical education end of program assessment for articulated credit. I know that's a lot. That was known as COSA, so for those who've been around for a while. And then also the apprenticeship, KDE Labor Cabinet approved apprenticeship, or the KDE approved alternate process for exceptional work experience. All of this information there's lots of resources for you on that KDE website for transition. And then also you can see for our English learners what I talked about of meeting the benchmarks on the access. Now we're going to get into the fun part. When we were doing trainings, I had the participants to log in. What they did is they clicked on it at the top and it said transition readiness. Where it says transition readiness, there's a line underneath of it. It's hyperlinked, and it would take them to the quiz that you see on your screen now. And you would go through we would give them a few minutes to go through those, and they would see, they would put yes or no or not enough information depending on what it was. So let's go quickly. You can do this in your district if you want to. Otherwise, you can do this, and it also has the score. It has what each one of them is. So if you don't want them to know, when it comes to this video, stop the video at this time and then let them take that little quiz, and then you can make it interactive with your district. So for Brianna, when you take a look at the first one, it'll ask you, is she academic ready? Yes, because she took the ACT, mathematics, she met the first bucket of quantitative or natural science with the mathematics, and she also hit the second bucket, which was dual credit in written communications, and earned a letter grade of B. And remember, it has to be at least a C or higher for dual credit. So she met that last bucket of written or oral communication, etc. Now let's go to number 2, Elijah. Did Elijah meet it? No. Because Elijah took 2 things in that first bucket. He took AP statistics, which was the mathematics part, the mathematics, and then he also did the natural science, dual credit natural science. But he did not get that second bucket, so that he would not be what we call academic ready, because he would have to do one of those and then also meet that oral and written communication, etc. on that second bulleted list on that chart. Madison. Did Madison, is she academic ready or not? There's not enough information for you to be able to figure out whether Madison met it or not, because it doesn't tell you which IB course that she earned a 6 on to see if she met the benchmarks on that second bucket or not. Number 4, Isaiah. Did he meet it? No, because he met it on the mathematics, the first bucket, but he didn't meet the second bucket, so therefore he's not academic, because aquatics is not one of those courses that is acceptable for our dual credit for that other bucket, for written or oral communication, etc. Luis, did Luis meet the benchmarks? Yes, because Luis met it both on the ACT only. Remember, it can be a combination of those, or it can be straight out, you know, those courses as well. So for ACT, met it the mathematics and met the benchmark on the English on ACT. And remember, for ACT, for that second part, it could be either English or reading, not both. And you have to make the mathematics part, because that's the first part of quantitative or natural science. Now, number 6, Miranda. Is Miranda academic readiness? Miranda would be academic readiness if Miranda has met the benchmarks on the transition attainment record for alternate assessment. The last one, Miguel. Did Miguel meet it for English language ready? Now, this is a little different than our academic, because for English ready, Miguel did meet it for access, because he did score a 4.5 on a tier B or C, and that is the exit criteria for access. But then he would also have to be, remember what I told you, he also have to met English language readiness, and then has to go back and also meet either academic or career. So then you would want to make sure he'd done that. Now, here is our contact information for our office. You're more than glad to contact any one of us, and we'll be more than glad to help you with this. We do want you to make sure that any questions you have, feel free to email us or contact us, and we'll work through any issues that you have, or any situations that you want to talk to us about. We do appreciate your time, and thank you all so much for all you do. Have a great day.